We here highly resolve that these dead should not have died in vain.
I was out with my girlfriend on December 7th, 1941, and so when they said the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor, that was on a Sunday, and I could hardly wait for Monday to show up. So Monday, rushed down and joined the Navy, but I was only 16. And so I went home and I told my folks, hey, I'm in the Navy now. My dad said, oh, no, you're not. So the next day, he grabbed me, you're still free. Took me by the ear, and we went back, and he unjoined me until I reached the age of 17.
I was 17, and I too joined the Navy and took my papers and laid them on my dining room table at home. My parents came home, could hear them from my bedroom, and my mom says, I've been waiting for this. She knew I was going to join the Navy.
I was working at Montgomery Ward's in Wenatchee. One day I just decided I was tired of retail. And so by noon hour, I went out and joined the Army. And my mother just had a fit. But it was a real good experience for me, yeah.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America,
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
Indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
My folks were against the war, and so I had a referment for 6 months. And my dad talked to me one day and says, well, son, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I went and joined the Navy.
My entry into the Navy was a little different. I graduated from high school in 1943, and prior to graduating, I enlisted in the Naval Aviation Cadet Training Program. Being young, like a lot of people, we were going to get in there and get this war over in a hurry. I found out that once you sign on the dotted line, somebody else calls the shots.
The summer of 1943, I was in the smoke jumpers in Missoula, and there was a contingent of Coast Guard that came down from Alaska that went through our training program. And so I knew, I was just going to be 17 that September, so I knew I was going in one or the other, so Coast Guard sounded good. So the higher up said, well, you've been all through the training, so all you got to do is go through the physical. We'll put in for you, and you're in the Coast Guard. So I was all jumping to go. Well, it wasn't until I got into the physical, they found out that me, like 3 of my own brothers, colorblind. So down the hall, no, maybe the Navy. So look at now the guy says, there's number so-and-so on this page and so forth on this page. Which one is number 43? I guess wrong. Down the hall it went. Maybe the Seabees. The Seabees didn't mind.
I chose the Marines.
I didn't want to be in the Army, that's why.
Well, we were inducted in Spokane, Washington, and we were shipped immediately to down toward Biloxi, Mississippi, where I got my boot training and assigned to go to engineers training school.
When I went into the Army, I took my basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, in the Combat Engineers. And after that, I was assigned to the Army Specialized Training Program Unit, at Washington State College, which is now Washington State University.
Then I went to Farragut, Idaho for boot camp, and they knew I was a diver and swimmer, so all I did at boot camp was teach swimming. I took my trumpet and played the jazz band, and that was my boot training, was at Farragut.
I had my basic at Des Moines, Iowa. A lot of hard work. Basic training wasn't fun.
I did my naval training in Bainbridge, Maryland, and then it was interesting, we didn't know, but they were having the build-up to invade the Philippines, and so I didn't even have leave after the naval training series, and so they put us on boxcars, if you can believe. You ever seen a boxcar? And we rode, it took us 7 days to go from Bainbridge, Maryland to San Diego. Riding in a boxcar, we slept more or less on hay and so forth. We had a Johnny on the spot. And then when we would stop, USO or somebody would meet us with the food and so forth. And so we got there. And then we disembarked, and immediately we got on an LST, which is a landing ship troops, right? And it took us another 7 days to get to Hawaii, and then I was there about 12 hours, and I find myself on a minesweeper. And then we headed to Australia.
And then I commissioned a ship on the west coast in Vancouver, which was an aircraft carrier. Took it through the Panama Canal to the east coast, made 2 trips across the Atlantic, hauling some beautiful black fighters to the Casablanca for the French, and then back through the canal and picked up a squadron and headed to the Pacific. So, and then I was at Iwo Jima and Okinawa and Leyte, Luzon, the Philippine Sea, and Japan.
And then deployed overseas through New Jersey to England, where we spent 5 months. We then deployed to the continent and inlanding in France in December of 1944, just in time for the Battle of the Bulge, which I participated in. So that's the point in time when I joined Patton's Third Army, and we fought, helped in the relief of Bastogne and the closure of the Bulge invasion at Ophelis in February of 1945. We then continued to attack across Europe, 1,200 miles in combat through Belgium, Luxembourg, across Germany, and we wound up in Linz and Amstetten in Austria, where we contacted the Russian troops, and that ended the war in August of 1945.
Came home with them. About May 1945. After being on Bougainville, Guam, and Iwo Jima. Machine gunner on the front lines all the time. I shouldn't be here.
And for the build-up of the Armada to go to the Philippines. And there were 350 ships, as far as you could see, that were lined up. And so we said goodbye, and 6 days ahead of the Armada, we left for the Philippines, and we got up there, and we swept out the Leyte Gulf for the invasion fleet. And so we got everything all cleaned up, and here they come and make their landings. And then MacArthur, you ever heard of him?
A couple times.
Yeah, we made sure everything was clear and calm and everything, and then MacArthur walks ashore. And he was holding his coat like this. I have returned. Well, if we could have gotten our hands on that guy, all he had to do was say we instead of I, but he wouldn't go with that I.
We had a tent we lived in Italy, in Cerignola, which is the 15th Air Force, and we flew out of there, and I got credit for 50 missions.
Well, we came in the third day. The 4th and 5th Divisions landed on day 1. And we were supposed to be in reserve. No reserves. We went right in there, and gosh, we hadn't been on the island over an hour or two, and I lost 2 sergeants killed. You couldn't take a foxhole. Sand would just cave in, Wouldn't have done any good if we dug a foxhole, I don't think. Because there weren't really any front lines. You move 25 feet up, Japanese would pop up behind you.
Mindoro, we swept the area clean of mines there, and then that's where the Zeros started kamikazing. That was the first time they found out that this really worked. Here's a picture of the Zero right here, and that was sort of our. We had one miss us by about 50 feet.
The people that flew in the Pacific had a much harder time than we had.
I was blown into the water, and when I came to, I was being picked up by a PT boat. And they said, "What did you do on the minesweeper?" I said, "It was a 20-millimeter gunner." They said, "There's one right over there. Get on it."
But the kamikazes were something else. We had ships hit on both sides of me, but we never got hit. And, but they loved aircraft carriers. Iwo Jima, that's where we met the worst of them. And then Okinawa after that, and Leyte and Luzon. But they split our fleet up. Half of us went through the Philippine Sea, and we sunk the last half of the Japanese Navy, and then the other half went north toward Japan, and they sunk the rest of the Japanese Navy. But out in the Philippine Sea, one night, one of our carriers was hit. And so they sent us out, turned all our lights on, so we could take the planes in from this other carrier that had been hit. So the planes would come in, and we'd get the pilot out and his camera, push the plane over the bow, and then we'd take in another one. We lost all the planes, but we saved all the pilots.
I was on island Kwajalein in the South Pacific, and I landed there, and I went down to the dock just because of the ship unloading, and I looked up, and there was a great big crane, and the crane operator up there, pair of shorts on, big red beard, and I thought, gosh, that kind of looks familiar, and then I didn't think so. I went back down and looked up again. There was my schoolmate. He was Masibi, the crane operator. And I want to say about Kwajalein, people don't realize that battle, how devastating it was for everybody. And that was the first island that was taken back that was actually belonged to the Japanese.
Yeah.
And ships came in. It was a completely vegetated island. They shot the whole thing off. The island is a half-mile wide, 2 miles long, and 7 feet above sea level.
17 feet, huh?
7 feet above sea level.
7?
Yeah. Anyway, that battle lasted. Yeah, that battle lasted for 4 days. And this is something that tells you about war. We lost 142 dead, 2 missing, and 845 wounded. We killed 4,938 Japanese on that island. Almost 5,000 on that one island, and dug great big grave and put them in it.
You do so many missions, and they let you go to the Vatican, and so many more, and you get to go to Capri for 5 days, which is swimming and eating and all that good stuff.
You know, there was several times that we actually ran out of food aboard ship, and we'd gone days without having hardly anything to eat,
Yeah.
because we hit two of those typhoons, blew us clear off our course, 600 miles, the whole fleet, and we ran out of food. We finally got into, I think, Okinawa or someplace where we could, Karimaredo it was, and get more food and ammunition. And it was, I weighed 125 pounds, I got when I was it was my job I had, because I didn't get much sleep. Dwayne and I, with the job we had, we'd come in at night and he'd say, "God damn it, Dick, we could have been killed today." Because of the kamikazes diving at us all the time. So then we'd fix a little torpedo juice for you.
I missed hamburgers, steaks, and so forth, because all we had on board the ship was Spam. And I won't tell you what we used to call it.
I can remember clearly how I didn't like lamb stew every day, so I hit the breakfast line 3 times a day.
On our ship, we had 4 kinds of meat: sheep, ram, lamb, and mutton.
I was a good milk drinker, and we never had any milk at all. I remember when I went, I landed back in Honolulu, first idea was go down and get a bottle of milk and drink it.
We always had plenty of water. Oh, I spent almost 6 months there in New Zealand, you know, getting ready to go up and they bring beer in and Coke. I didn't drink beer, so I traded all my beer for Coke.
We did our shakedown, and we went to Cuba initially, and we went ashore there at Guantanamo, where all these prisons and so forth are now. Anyway, they had a beer called Hatui, and their slogan was "the beer that made Milwaukee jealous." Well, we didn't know, but it was 12% alcohol.
Well, Jack will back me up on Quadrilling in the lumber yard.
Yeah.
We always had a batch of Raisin Jack going.
And ended up going aboard the USS Xylan, APA-3, an attack troop transport, and went to the South Pacific, sitting in Ulithi Atoll when the war was declared over. Loaded with troops, apparently part of the buildup for the potential invasion of Japan.
So as we entered under the Golden Gate, the Japanese surrendered. So I had a great time celebrating in San Francisco.
You know, for a land Marine Corps, I spent 128 days aboard a ship. And I wasn't even a seagoing Marine.
Probably the best part about the Navy and my time in the service was after the war, somebody up above decided that the ship should be taken to Norfolk, Virginia, and mothballed.
Yeah.
And so we were privileged to make a trip down the west coast and through the Panama Canal and up to the east coast in Norfolk. And I suppose that's kind of like a lot of government decisions because a year or so after the ship was there, it was sold for scrap. Could have been just as easily sold for scrap on the west coast.
When I arrived home, my folks, they couldn't do enough, and my dad went out, he had steaks and all this stuff, you know, and which was wonderful for them to do that. But anyway, all I wanted to do was have privacy. And I'd go in the bathtub and I'd soak for hours.
What helped me was I saw the Pangborn and Herndon land up here in 1931, and then the Japanese had the swap back and forth, and about 7 years ago I took my grandson and I over to Japan, and I'm glad I did, because I had how you thought about the thing, and I found out that they're just as human as we are, and it really did help me.
Yeah.
Because we lived with a family, and they couldn't speak English, and I couldn't speak Japanese. In fact, when first morning we were there, I sent over to Seattle and got a hat, baseball hat of Ichiro, and I took it. And of course, we sat down for breakfast, and I got up and went back into that room and brought this hat out and gave it to Mr. Honda, who it was, I said, yep. He goes, he pulled his sleeve up.
Yeah.
So that part we understood.
Was that when I took the oath to be in this program, I had an opportunity to get off. I could have. And I'm going to do everything in the world I can to get my training done. And the good Lord will protect me, which happened. I mean, it really happened.
So she wrote me letters with every day I was overseas. Sometimes those letters would pile up 10 days at a time before I get them, you know. Yeah, she was the one that kept me going.
I went back several times to look at it from a peaceful standpoint, and there's just cemeteries all over the place, you know, of our boys.
When the war was over, I was able to qualify for a special training program in what they call Biarritz American University in southern France. I went down there as a student and was put on the staff where I taught civil engineering and surveying until the time came for my return to the United States and discharge.
The GI Bill was just a savior for a lot of us, where you had to go to college and they paid the tuition and the books, and it got me through University of Southern California.
Before the war, I'd been in Whitworth, and then I was going to be a teacher. Over there in the foxhole, I decided I'm a little bit nostalgic for the apple game. So I was going to go back to Cobell to WSU, get a degree in horticulture, which I did. Graduated from Cougarville in about 1948. Came to Wenatchee, went to work for Skookum, then Northwest Wholesale. Been here ever since.
I graduated from Oregon State University in Corvallis, all on the GI Bill. Changed my whole life. I grew up on a farm and in a logging community, and probably would have spent the rest of my life working in a sawmill or doing something like that. Instead of that, I was able to go to work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, an agency called Farmers Home Administration.
The GI Bill changed life in the United States.
Okay, I'm in the Navy now.
I didn't want to be in the Army.
Kearney, Nebraska, and I worked at the library.
We could have been killed today.
I got on the internet here about a year ago, and I just put in the Battle of Kwajalein, and I not too much of an internet operator, but anyway, I started looking at it, and it was telling about the battle. In fact, I got this sheet off telling about the battle and everything. And at the end of it, it said, it talked about, I'll read it to you, Tinker, the Japanese dog that survived the fight in Kwajalein, was buried in 1962 near the turtle pond. Tinker had been taken in by folks on Kwajalein and lived out his days there. And I just about fell out of my rocking chair. But there's reading Tinker. I took care of him for about 7 months.
That's your buddy, right?
Yeah, for about 7 months. And he lived to be 20 years old.